The black maid tried to leave, but the billionaire stopped her with a shocking secret. "Where do you think you're going, Evelyn?" The word sliced through the air, as sharp and unforgiving as a whip. Veronica Whitmore, poised in her silk robe, set her coffee cup down with a deliberate clink on the fine china, her icy gaze locking onto the black maid standing rigidly by the door. The morning light streamed through the expansive windows of the penthouse, casting a soft glow on the luxurious dining room, but there was nothing warm about the look in Veronica's eyes. Evelyn Carter, her hands trembling slightly, froze. The silver coffee pot hung heavily in her grasp. At 60, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a plain headscarf, she had the body of a woman worn by years of silent, often thankless labor. Her back ached, but she straightened with pride. "I'm just refilling the coffee, ma'am," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Refilling?" Veronica's voice was laced with disdain. "You've been wandering around this house like a ghost for the past 2 decades. Too slow, too distracted. Maybe it's time we just let you go. Maybe Michael's right. We should have fired you years ago." Daniel Whitmore, at 25, the heir to the Whitmore fortune, smirked from his seat, eyes glued to his phone. "She's part of the furniture now, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with apathy. "What's the point? She'll never leave." Claire, their 23-year-old daughter, giggled softly as she adjusted the pearl earrings dangling from her ears. "Honestly, I think she enjoys watching us eat while she serves." Evelyn's hands shook as she set the coffee pot down, the words stinging deeper than the years of insults she had silently endured. For 25 long years, she had risen before dawn, prepared their meals, ironed their clothes, and cared for their children, all while being treated as nothing more than the hired help. She had given them her youth, her strength, and her heart, and yet she was still nothing but the maid in their eyes. From the darkened corner of the room, whose study door was slightly ajar, Michael Whitmore, the billionaire, stood silently, watching. At 62, tall and broad-shouldered, he carried his wealth with an air of confidence that made him untouchable. His Italian suit, gleaming cufflinks, and sharp features exuded power. But it wasn't the stocks on his laptop screen that captured his attention. It was Evelyn. He had witnessed her endure every insult, every cruel word, every moment she had been treated as less than human, and she never once faltered. Veronica's voice broke the silence. "Evelyn, this toast is cold again. Can't you even get that right after all these years?" The chandelier overhead flickered as the hurt flashed in Evelyn's eyes. She lowered her gaze, murmuring, "I'll make another batch, ma'am." As she turned to leave, her reflection briefly flashed in the polished marble floor. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands worn thin from years of service, but in that fleeting moment there was something else, a spark of resolve. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman who had given everything, but had reached her breaking point. No one noticed it, not Veronica, not Daniel, not Claire, but Michael did. His jaw tightened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. For the first time in decades, Evelyn Carter was no longer just enduring. She was about to do something no one expected. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, muffling the sounds of their careless laughter and the clink of silverware from the dining room. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, one hand pressed firmly against her chest. The coffee pot rattled in her grip before she set it down gently. The weight of the years, the insults, the constant reminders of her place in their world pressed down on her like 1,000 pounds. But it was Veronica's words that cut deeper than all the rest. "We should have let you go years ago.
Evelyn whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "I can't stay here another day." She stood there, her eyes staring at the faded calendar pinned to the wall, feeling the passage of time weigh heavily on her. 25 years she had given to this house, but she was still nothing more than the maid. The faint sounds of laughter from the dining room filtered through the walls. Daniel mocked her pace. Claire is calling her furniture. Evelyn clenched her fist around the apron strings tied tightly at her waist. That laughter was not just noise. It was a reminder of her place, someone who would never truly belong. Evelyn stood still for a long moment, her fingers trembling as they gripped the old suitcase. The sound of laughter from downstairs echoed through the walls of her small attic room, a sharp reminder of the family she had served for so many years. She had spent decades in silence, bearing their cruelty and neglect. But today everything had changed. Today, Evelyn Carter was done. She had grown up in Georgia, where hard work and sacrifice were the only paths to survival. She had been taught to give without expecting anything in return, to endure hardship and keep her head down. But now, as the years passed, she had realized just how much of herself she had given away. Not once in 25 years had Veronica or her children seen her as anything but a tool for their convenience. They didn't see her as a woman. They didn't see her as a person. She was a ghost, a shadow, someone to be ordered around, mocked, and discarded when they grew tired of her presence. And now they had the audacity to say in her face that they wished they had let her go years ago. The old brown suitcase in her hands was the only thing that had ever belonged to her in all this time. She hadn't touched it in decades, but today, as her life unraveled before her, it felt like the only part of her that was still hers. Slowly, she unlatched the brittle clasp, watching the hinges creak in protest. A fine layer of dust covered the surface, a testimony to the years that had passed without a single thought for the woman who had been invisible in her own life. Inside, there were a few neatly folded dresses, their edges frayed from use, but still holding the memories of the woman she used to be. A photograph of her parents lay beside them, their faces smiling up at her from the faded print. She remembered them. Sharecroppers, people who had lived their whole lives in the shadow of a world that didn't care about their existence. They had taught her the value of service, of hard work, of giving without asking for anything in return. And for years, she had followed their lessons. But now, as she looked at the suitcase, she realized she could no longer live by their teachings. For so long, she had sacrificed herself for others. But who was she now? She wasn't the maid. She wasn't anyone's servant. The years of putting their needs before her own had worn her down, but she wasn't going to let them take one more second of her life. "This is it," she whispered, her voice thick with both sorrow and resolve. "I can't stay where I'm not wanted." She turned away from the suitcase and grabbed her worn coat. The light above flickered, casting long shadows against the wall. The chill of the room matched the coldness that had settled in her heart. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn Carter wasn't just existing. She was reclaiming something she had lost a long time ago. Her dignity, her identity, her right to be more than just the maid. Downstairs, the laughter of the Whitmore family swelled again, but this time it didn't break her. She grabbed her suitcase and placed it by the door. Tomorrow, when the sun rose, she would leave. Evelyn made her way down the grand hallway of the Whitmore mansion, her worn shoes clicking against the marble floors, each step a painful reminder of the years she had spent serving this family. The hallway seemed endless, the portraits on the walls staring down at her, some of them memories of a time when she had been more than just a servant. She had rocked Daniel to sleep as a baby, soothed his tears, cared for him when his mother couldn't be bothered. Those moments felt like another lifetime now. The house was silent as she moved through it, the heavy air thick with anticipation. The staff was beginning to notice her departure. She could hear Mrs. Hale, the cook, pause mid-chop, the knife suspended in the air. "Is she leaving?" she whispered to the butler. The sound of Mrs. Hale's voice trembled with disbelief. "She's leaving," Foster, the butler, murmured back, his usually steady voice shaky. Two younger maids near the staircase exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. "She built this house," one of them said, eyes wide with awe. "She'll never make it past the gates." Evelyn didn't look back. She had heard all the whispers over the years, the sly remarks, the jokes at her expense. But today, they couldn't touch her. Today, she was walking for herself, not for Veronica, not for Daniel, not for anyone who had ever treated her as less than human. As she walked past the family portraits, she stopped for a moment in front of one. It was of Daniel, age 10, sitting stiffly in a velvet jacket, his small hand resting on her shoulder. In that moment, she wasn't just the maid. She was a woman who had raised him, loved him, and cared for him when no one else would. She had given him everything, and in return, he had never even known the truth. She swallowed the lump in her throat and continued on, her heart pounding in her chest. Halfway down the hall, Veronica's laugh rang out from the drawing room. The sound was sharp and grating, but Evelyn didn't falter. She gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter, her knuckles white. The thought of what Veronica would think when she found out Evelyn was gone was the final push she needed. The Whitmore house had always been built on appearances, on wealth and status. But without her, without the person who had kept it all running, what would they have left? Evelyn reached the foyer, the air growing colder as she approached the double oak doors. The Whitmore crest, intricately carved into the wood, seemed to mock her. For all the wealth, all the grandeur, the mansion had never been a home for her. She had spent decades here, and yet she had always been on the outside, looking in. She pushed the doors open, the hinges groaning like a secret that had finally been revealed. As the winter wind rushed in, Evelyn stood for a moment, her hand resting on the doorframe, her suitcase beside her. The cold air bit at her cheeks, tugging at the hem of her skirt. For a brief moment, she stood still, taking it all in. The weight of freedom mixed with the sting of loss. She was leaving everything behind, everything she had known for so long, but she couldn't stay in a house that had never seen her as anything but a servant. Before Evelyn could take another step, a shadow moved across the driveway. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael Whitmore, tall and commanding as ever, stepped forward from the doorway. His presence was undeniable, his every movement exuding power. His suit jacket hung loosely around his frame, his tie undone, but his eyes were fixed on her. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying through the night air. "You can't leave." The word struck her like a slap. She gripped her suitcase tighter, her throat dry, her body suddenly weak. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment she knew would come but had been too afraid to face. She had given everything to this family, and now, just as she was about to walk away, he was stopping her. She took a step back, her knees trembling. "I've given you half my life," she whispered, her voice cracking. I've cooked, cleaned, raised your children, and endured every insult this house had to offer. I am leaving with what little dignity I have left." The staff had quietly gathered near the doorway, watching, waiting. No one had ever spoken to Michael Whitmore like this, not like Evelyn was doing now. His jaw tightened as he took a step closer to her. "I won't let you walk out that gate," he said, his voice growing firmer.
Evelyn laughed bitterly, though her eyes filled with tears. "Won't let me?" she repeated. "You've already let me be humiliated day after day. What more could you possibly want from me?" Michael's face softened slightly, his voice lowering, almost pleading. "This isn't about what I want," he said. "It's about what you don't know." Evelyn's grip on her suitcase trembled as the words sunk in. "What don't I know?" she asked, her voice hoarse with disbelief. The winter wind howled around them, carrying the weight of a secret that had been buried for decades. And for the first time, Evelyn understood that Michael wasn't stopping her because he wanted her to stay. He was stopping her because he had something to reveal, something that would change everything. "Don't make me say it here," he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. But Evelyn's eyes were blazing with defiance. "Then say it," she demanded. "Say whatever it is that's worth chaining me to this house one more day." Evelyn's knees buckled as Michael's words struck her like a lightning bolt. Her heart was racing, her breath shallow as she stumbled backward. Her hand instinctively shot to her mouth, her mind unable to process what had just been said. "He is your son." The words echoed in her ears like a deafening thunderclap, their weight crushing her chest. The suitcase fell to the ground, its contents spilling across the courtyard like broken dreams. Old clothes, faded photographs, memories that had been locked away for too long. Evelyn's eyes widened in disbelief, her hands shaking as she tried to piece together what was happening. "What did you say?" she whispered hoarsely, the words barely leaving her lips. She felt the world around her tilt, her vision blurring as everything she knew began to unravel. Michael Whitmore's secret had been buried for decades, but now, in this moment, it was laid bare, and the truth hung in the air like a storm waiting to strike. Her heart hammered in her chest, the realization hitting her harder than anything she had ever felt before. Daniel, the boy she had raised, the child she had cared for, was not Veronica's. He was hers, her son. Her voice cracked as she tried to process the enormity of what Michael had just revealed. "No, no, don't you dare play with me like this." She shook her head violently, trying to shake the words from her mind. This was worse than any insult, worse than any cruel remark. She had endured the sneers, the whispers, the mocking laughter, but this was a betrayal that tore at the very fabric of her soul. Michael stepped closer, his face pale, his usually confident composure cracking for the first time in decades. "Evelyn, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice ragged, filled with regret. "I should have told you long ago." Her hands flew up, trembling. "Told me what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her breath coming in uneven gasps. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers shaking as he pulled out an old photograph, its edges frayed and its colors faded with time. He held it out toward her, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the image. An image of her, barely in her 20s, standing beside Michael. They were wrapped in each other's arms, smiling as though the world was theirs to conquer. Her knees weakened, and she staggered back against the iron gate, clutching it as though it might steady her. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never let it go," Michael said softly, his words raw. "We were in love, Evelyn. We were young, reckless, and the world didn't approve. My family, my father, he threatened to disown me if I didn't walk away. I caved. I built this empire, this name, on his money. But I left you to carry the weight alone.
Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks as the truth settled in. She had spent years believing she was merely a servant in the Whitmore mansion, but all along she had been a mother, raising her own child without even knowing it. "And the child?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Daniel, our son," Michael said quietly. "Everyone believed he was Veronica's, born into her perfect marriage. But he's yours, Evelyn. Yours and mine."
The courtyard fell into stunned silence as Evelyn's world shattered. For years, she had soothed Daniel's fevers, bandaged his scraped knees, and whispered bedtime stories when his mother couldn't be bothered. She had thought she was merely serving the Whitmore family, but in reality, she had been mothering her own child, blind to the truth. Her body collapsed to her knees, her hands pressing against the cold stone of the courtyard as a guttural cry tore from her chest. The pain, the grief, the rage, everything she had bottled up for decades came flooding out in that one unbearable sound. The years of silence had finally broken, and Evelyn Carter, once invisible, was now a woman who had been robbed of everything she had ever known. Michael knelt beside her, his hand hovering above her trembling shoulder. "I should have told you," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have given you your place, but I was a coward, Evelyn, and it's haunted me every day since." Evelyn lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes burning with both fury and heartbreak. "You stole my life," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You stole my son!" The mansion doors banged open, the sound slicing through the thick silence. Veronica's sharp voice rang out across the courtyard. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Behind her, Daniel and Claire stood frozen, their faces pale with confusion. The secret, once buried deep in the Whitmore family's past, was now laid bare. The empire they had built on lies was about to crumble. Veronica stormed into the courtyard, her silk gown flowing behind her like a battle flag. Her eyes darted from Evelyn, crumpled on the ground, to Michael, kneeling beside her. "What nonsense is this?" Veronica spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Michael, get away from her!" Daniel's voice cracked as he looked between his father and the maid. "Dad, what's happening?" he asked, his words filled with desperation. Michael rose slowly, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of decades of hidden truth. "It's true, Daniel," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "She's your mother, not Veronica." The staff, gathered at the doorway, gasped in unison. Evelyn's tears flowed freely now, her heart breaking with the weight of the truth. She was not just the maid. She had been the mother all along. The courtyard was heavy with silence. Daniel's hands trembled as he stared at Evelyn, his world collapsing around him. You? My mother?" he whispered, the words barely leaving his lips. "Yes," Evelyn sobbed. "Every moment I thought was duty. It was love, and I never even knew." Veronica let out a wail, her fury filling the air. "You coward!" she shrieked at Michael. "You've ruined us! You let her worm her way into our lives, our home, our marriage!" Michael's composure cracked as he turned to face her. His voice was firm, final. "Enough, Veronica. Without Evelyn, this house would have collapsed decades ago. Without her, Daniel would not even exist." Daniel stood there, pale and shaking, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He turned to Evelyn, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. He reached out a trembling hand, and their fingers met for the first time, not as mother and servant, but as mother and son. "Please don't leave me again," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. The wind rushed through the gates, carrying years of sacrifice, anguish, and hidden love into the cold night. Evelyn closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath that seemed to carry decades of pain. When she opened them again, her voice was steady, resolute.
"I will stay," she said softly, "but no longer as your maid. I will stay on my terms." Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Veronica staggered back, speechless, while Michael bowed his head, his eyes brimming with tears. Daniel's grip tightened around Evelyn's hand, his lips trembling into the smallest of smiles. For the first time in the Whitmore mansion's history, Evelyn Carter was not just the maid. She was the mother, the truth, the woman who had given everything, and finally reclaimed it. The mansion seemed to exhale, its cold marble walls echoing with a silence that felt like change. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sacrifice is never wasted, love is never forgotten, and kindness always finds its way back home.